The morning Darnell lost his last regular customer, it was 17 degrees and dropping. He had pulled his cart to the corner of 5th and Meridian at 5:45, same as always, and set up the coffee urns and the foil trays while the city breathed its cold breath around him. He wore a canvas apron over a grey flannel shirt, and under the shirt, 2 undershirts he had layered since October. Over everything he wore, the coat. It was a heavy wool overcoat, charcoal grey, that had belonged to his father. The lining had frayed at the left elbow, and the top button was held on by a knot of dark thread he had tied himself, but the coat was warm and it had survived 11 winters at this corner, and Darnell treated it the way you treat anything that has never let you down. That morning, a man named George walked up and told Darnell he was moving. Not moving apartments, moving cities. His company had transferred him to Phoenix and he was leaving that Friday. George had bought a large dark coffee and a bacon roll from Darnell every weekday for 4 years. He shook Darnell's hand, left a 20 on the cart for a coffee that cost $1.75, and walked back into the building on the corner of 5th and Meridian that had always swallowed him whole at 8 o'clock. Darnell watched him go. George was the 3rd regular he had lost in 8 weeks. The first 2 had been layoffs, now a transfer. The corner of 5th and Meridian was changing. The buildings were changing, new glass facades going up over old brick, new names on the lobbies, new faces that bought nothing and walked faster than the old faces had. He watched George disappear through the revolving door, and he poured himself a small coffee, and he let it warm his hands through the paper cup. He had not told his wife Renee about the customers. He had not told her about the 3 weeks in November when the cart had barely covered the supply costs. He had not told her that he was starting to do the math on how long they could hold the apartment if things stayed thin. Their son Marcus was 9 years old, and Marcus had asthma, and the winter air was the worst thing in the world for it, and the medications were $212 a month after their insurance covered its portion, and Darnell had been paying that $212 every month, without fail, for 3 years, because that was the thing that was not going to slip. Everything else could tighten. That number stayed. He did not know yet what that morning was the beginning of. He could not have known, standing there at 5th and Meridian with a paper cup getting cold in his hands, that the 4 weeks ahead of him were going to be the hardest of his life, and that the moment he was standing in right now, this ordinary grey morning, was going to matter more than he could imagine. He could not have known any of that. He just knew it was 17 degrees and George was gone, and the coffee cart needed to earn its day. If you have ever stood on a cold corner and watched the thing you built get quiet, you know that particular loneliness. If you want to know what Darnell did next, stay with this story. He packed down the urns at 2 in the afternoon. He had sold 41 coffees and 23 breakfast rolls. On a strong day, he moved 90 coffees. He loaded the cart into his van and drove it to the storage unit on Meridian South and paid $12 for the parking. And then he drove home to an apartment on Callaway Street where Renee had dinner going and Marcus was at the kitchen table doing his reading homework. Darnell kissed them both and changed his shirt and ate without saying much. And that night, when Marcus was asleep and Renee was on the phone with her sister, he sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and did the math he had been avoiding. It looked the way he had feared. He wrote the number at the bottom of the column and circled it, and then he tore the page off the legal pad and folded it and put it in his shirt pocket, because some things you carry close while you figure out what to do. He went to bed, and he lay next to Renee in the dark, and he did not sleep for a long time. The next 4 weeks he showed up at 5th and Meridian at 5:45 every morning without exception. He showed up in rain. He showed up when the temperature dropped to 11 degrees and his hands went numb in the gloves he wore, and the breath from the coffee urns was the warmest thing on the block. He showed up the morning Marcus had a bad night and Darnell had barely slept 4 hours, and he set up the cart and he said good morning to every face that passed, and he meant it every time. There were vendor meetings that winter he could not attend because they cost $40 to register, and he needed that $40 for supplies. There was a weekend in mid-December when the city put a new construction scaffold up on the east side of 5th and Meridian that reduced his foot traffic by 1/3 because the scaffold changed the walking pattern, and people went around the block. He called the city office listed on the scaffold permit and sat on hold for 45 minutes, and no one answered. He tried again the next morning and got a woman who told him he could file a variance request that would be reviewed in 60 to 90 days. He thanked her and hung up and went back to work. The coat stayed on from the moment he left the van until the moment he got back in. Some mornings it was the only warm thing between him and deciding to quit. The day it happened was a Thursday in late January. The cold had turned mean the night before, moving through mean and into something that felt personal. The forecast said wind chill of -4, and Darnell had seen those forecasts before and set his alarm for 5 anyway, and gotten up and done what he did. He layered his shirts, he pulled on the apron, he put on the coat, and he drove to 5th and Meridian and set up in the dark while the city came alive around him. By 8:15, the morning rush had thinned. Darnell was wiping down the cart surface when he heard someone ask him for a coffee, and he looked up, and the man standing at the cart was not someone he recognized. The man was somewhere in his late 50s. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, wearing a suit that Darnell registered immediately as expensive, dark and perfectly fitted, but no overcoat, no scarf. He was carrying a leather briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other, and he looked like he had come out of one of the glass towers on the block and stepped directly into January without thinking about it. He was shivering. Not dramatically, not in a way that made a scene, but steadily, the kind of shivering that meant he had been cold for a few minutes already, and it was setting in. "Large," the man said. "Black?" "Large dark, yes, sir," Darnell said. He poured the coffee and set it on the counter of the cart and gave the man a number, and the man paid without looking up from his phone. He took the coffee and wrapped both hands around the cup and stood there for a moment. Darnell watched him, not intrusively, just the way you notice a person when something seems off. "You need a minute out of the wind," Darnell said. "I got a little shelter here on the lee side." The man glanced up. He had a square face, deep-set eyes, close-trimmed grey at his temples. He looked at Darnell the way people look when they are surprised someone noticed them. "I'm fine," he said. He was not fine. He was shivering harder now, and he had to hold the coffee with both hands to keep it steady, and Darnell watched him for another 10 seconds, and then he did the thing he did, without thinking about it much, because it was the thing he would have done for anyone. He took the coat off. He had to unbutton it, which took a moment because the top button with the knotted thread required some patience, and he folded it over his arm and held it out. "Put this on," Darnell said. The man stared at him. "I'm serious," Darnell said. "You're going to lose fingers standing there like that. I've got these layers and I'm moving around. You look like you've got somewhere to be. Take the coat." The man looked at the coat. It was old, and the lining was frayed, and it was not the kind of coat a man in that suit would wear. Darnell knew that. He held it out anyway. "I can't take your coat," the man said. "You're not taking it," Darnell said. "I'm giving it. There's a difference." There was a long pause. The wind came up the corridor of 5th Street, and both of them felt it. The man looked at Darnell again, and something in his face shifted, some quick private calculation, and then he set the briefcase down on the edge of the cart and put the coat on. It was a little short in the sleeves and a little wide in the chest, and the knotted button sat crooked, and the man looked nothing like his suit while wearing it. He picked up his briefcase. "I'll have it back to you," the man said. "Whenever," Darnell said. "Or don't. It'll come back to me the right way when it's supposed to." The man looked at him for a moment longer than the conversation required. Then he nodded once and walked away, turning north on 5th, and was gone inside of 30 seconds. Darnell put his hands in the apron pockets and went back to work. He didn't ask the man's name. He did not think to. A man was cold. He had a coat the man needed more than he did at that moment. That was the whole of it as far as Darnell was concerned. The coat did not come back that day. It did not come back the next day or the day after that. By the following Monday, Darnell had more or less stopped expecting it. He worked in his layered shirts and his apron. And the cold was what it was. And he told himself the coat would find him eventually, and if it did not, well, his father had worn it for 15 years before him, and it had done what it was supposed to do. The math, meanwhile, did not improve. In early February, Darnell got a letter from the city office that said his corner permit was up for renewal in 60 days, and the fee had increased by 40% from the prior year. The letter had language in it about public space realignment initiatives that he read 3 times without fully understanding. He took it to a neighbourhood business council meeting, and a woman named Pat, who had been running a shoe repair shop for 22 years, read it and told him that what it meant, in plain terms, was that the city was reclassifying several vending spots in that district as premium commercial zones, and the new fees were designed to encourage, as the document put it, higher value density users of public adjacent retail space. "That means they want you gone," Pat said. "They want the corner," Darnell said. "They want the corner," she agreed. He drove home that night and sat in the van outside the apartment for 11 minutes before he went in. He could not let Renee see his face until he had it composed, and it took 11 minutes to get it there. He did not tell her about the letter. He told her the day had been okay. He ate dinner and helped Marcus with his spelling and read to him until he fell asleep, and he sat on the edge of Marcus's bed in the dark for a while, listening to the boy breathe the even, clear breath of a child whose medication was working, and he thought about the math and what a 40% fee increase did to it and what he was going to do. He went to bed, and he lay next to Renee, and he made himself breathe slow and even until she fell asleep. Then he stared at the ceiling. There are moments in a man's life that feel like a door closing. Not dramatically. No slam, just the quiet click of a latch, and in the dark of that bedroom, Darnell could hear it. He had been at that corner for 11 years. He had started with a borrowed cart and $100 afloat, and he had built it to something that sustained his family, and now the city was raising the floor on him, and 3 of his regulars were gone, and the scaffold was still up, and he did not know what the next step looked like. He did not talk to God about it in a formal way. He was not the kind of man who made a production of his faith, but he thought something that night in the dark that was close to a prayer. He thought, I have done the right thing every day I could. I have not cheated anyone. I have not taken what was not mine. I need the path to be there. I just need to be able to see it. He fell asleep somewhere around 2 a.m. with that thought still turning. He didn't know what was already in motion. The man in the coat had been walking north on 5th Street that Thursday morning when the cold stopped being background noise and became something he could not ignore. His name was Calvin Reed, and he ran Meridian Group, which was not a name most people outside of real estate and finance would recognize, but within those two worlds, it was a name attached to $430 million in active development projects, 17 commercial properties, 2 residential towers, and a civic partnership that had just signed a letter of intent with the city. He had run the firm for 19 years, taking over from his father at 39, and in those 19 years he had sat across tables from mayors and senators and had his photograph in the business section of the paper, and had lost his wife to cancer 6 years ago, and had raised his daughter Maya, mostly alone since then, and none of that context was visible at the coffee cart because context is rarely visible in a person. What was visible was that he was cold. He had come out of an 8 o'clock breakfast meeting in the lobby of the building at 6th and Madison without thinking to retrieve his overcoat from the coat check, which he had done because the dining room was warm, and his mind was on the agenda, and by the time he realized it, he was half a block south in the open air with a briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other, and the temperature at -4 with the wind chill and his suit jacket doing nothing at all. He had bought the coffee to get something warm in his hands. He had not expected a man to give him a coat. He wore it the 6 blocks to his office. His assistant, Joelle, saw him come through the lobby, and her expression went through 3 things in about 2 seconds, and Calvin said, "Don't," before she could say anything, and she did not say anything, and he went to his office and sat down and set the coat over the arm of the chair beside his desk and looked at it. It was old. The lining was coming loose at one elbow. The button at the top was attached with a knot of thread that looked like it had been there a while. It was the coat of a man who did not have another coat and who had given it anyway in -4 degrees to a stranger who had said nothing kind to deserve it. Calvin put his hand on the coat and sat there a moment. He thought about the man. He had seen him at that corner before, not many times because Calvin did not often come out that side of the building in the early morning, but he had seen him. He remembered the cart, the grey apron, the way the man said good morning, like he meant it. He asked Joelle to find out whatever was publicly available about the food vendor on the corner of 5th and Meridian. He told her he had borrowed something from the man and needed to return it. What Joelle found within about 90 minutes was not just a name. She found the permit renewal notice in the city's public record, filed 6 days earlier. The corner of 5th and Meridian was one of 14 vending spots the city's public space realignment initiative had flagged for reclassification. Meridian Group's name was in the same document as a partner in the corridor redevelopment that the reclassification was enabling. Calvin read the document. He read it again. The coffee cart on the corner of 5th and Meridian was one of the businesses that would be effectively priced out if the reclassification went forward. The timeline was 60 days. His firm's name was in that document. His firm's corridor project was the reason the corner was being reclassified. He sat with that for a long time. He was not a man who made decisions in anger or in guilt. He had spent 19 years learning to be slow and precise and to distinguish between what a situation felt like and what it actually was. He had also, over those years, gotten good at recognizing when something that felt coincidental was actually the world placing two things in front of him and asking him to pay attention. A man had given him his only coat in -4-degree wind chill without asking anything. Calvin's firm, without any malice, without knowing anything about that man, was the mechanism that would end his livelihood in 60 days. He called his development director in and he told him he wanted a full review of the vending permit reclassifications in the corridor project zone before anything went to the city. He said he wanted to know who was in those spots, how long they had been there, and what the realistic alternatives were. His development director, whose name was Troy, started to explain about the letter of intent timeline, and Calvin listened, and then he said, "I understand the timeline, Troy. I want the review." Troy nodded and went out. Calvin did not tell Troy about the coat. He did not tell anyone about the coat. That was not the kind of man he was. He simply did what he believed needed doing and left the reasoning private. Then he put on his own overcoat, which Joelle had retrieved from the breakfast venue's coat check, and he walked the 6 blocks back to 5th and Meridian. It was 11:40 in the morning. Darnell was at the cart wrapping up the late morning quiet before lunch, and he looked up when he heard someone approaching, and he saw the man from Thursday morning, in his own good coat now, carrying the charcoal wool overcoat over one arm. "You came back," Darnell said. "I told you I would," Calvin said. He set the coat on the cart counter. Darnell picked it up and checked the button out of habit, and it was still there, the knotted thread, holding. "You work this corner long," Calvin said. 11 years, Darnell said. Calvin nodded like that meant something specific to him. He looked at the cart, at the setup, at the way Darnell had it organized. "You here every morning?" 5:45, Darnell said. Calvin reached into his jacket and produced a card and set it on the counter beside the coat. "I'd like to know if I can do something for you," he said. "I can't say more than that right now, but I'd appreciate it if you called." Darnell looked at the card. It said Calvin Reed, Meridian Group, and had a direct number. He looked up. "You don't owe me anything," Darnell said. "That's not why I gave it to you." "I know it isn't," Calvin said. "That's why I'm here." He left without elaborating, and Darnell stood at the cart with the coat over one arm and the card in his other hand, and the coffee urn ticked behind him in the cold air. He turned the card over. He turned it back. He put it in his apron pocket, and he put the coat on, and he went back to work. And he was quiet for the rest of that afternoon. He did not call the number that day. He did not call it the next day. He was not a man who liked to ask for things. And he did not know what calling the man at Meridian Group was even going to produce. Help took many forms, and not all of them were the kind you could live with afterward. He called on the 3rd day, a Wednesday. He was sitting in the van on Calloway Street after dinner, and he dialed the number on the card, and it rang twice, and Calvin answered. "I'm the vendor," Darnell said, "from 5th and Meridian." "I know," Calvin said. "Thank you for calling. Can you come to my office Friday morning, 9 o'clock? "I can," Darnell said. He sat in the van for another few minutes after he hung up. Then he went inside and told Renee he had a meeting Friday morning and she would need to take Marcus to school. Renee looked at him the way she sometimes did when she knew more than he was saying. "A meeting with who?" she said. "A man I met at the cart," Darnell said. "I'll tell you more when I know more." She looked at him another moment, and then she nodded, because she knew Darnell well enough to know that when he did not want to get her hopes up, there was something there worth hoping for, and she trusted him enough not to push. Darnell ironed his good shirt that night and hung it on the back of the bedroom door and went to sleep. He drove to the Meridian Group offices on Friday morning in the van, which felt like the wrong vehicle for the address, and a receptionist named Sandra took him up to the 14th floor and brought him coffee without being asked, and he sat in a conference room with large windows looking out over the city, and he could see, if he turned his head at the right angle, the intersection of 5th and Meridian. He could see his corner from here. Calvin came in at 9:15 and apologized for being late, a genuine apology, not the performative kind, and he sat down across from Darnell and he opened a manila folder and he said, "I want to show you something." What he showed Darnell was the city document, the permit reclassification, the corridor project, his name in the public record, Meridian Group, as the development partner that had triggered the process. And beside it, a second document, which Calvin explained was a set of amendments he had submitted to the city 3 days earlier. The amendments excluded 6 of the 14 flagged vending sites from reclassification. One of them was the corner of 5th and Meridian. Darnell read the page. He read it again. He looked up. "The project still works," Calvin said. "We did the numbers. The 6 corners don't affect the development footprint. They were caught up in the reclassification by a map zone alignment issue that nobody caught in the original scope. My team is correcting it." "A map zone alignment issue," Darnell said. "That's what the formal language says," Calvin said. There was a quiet moment. Darnell understood what Calvin was doing, and he understood also that Calvin was allowing him the dignity of understanding it without making a thing of it. "You didn't have to do that," Darnell said. "I did, actually," Calvin said. "When you know something is wrong and you have the ability to correct it, that's not really a choice. It's just what you do." Darnell recognized those words. They were the words of a man who lived by the same private logic he did. He recognized that in people sometimes a particular absence of performance around the thing they believed, and it sat with him. "The permit renewal fee," Calvin said. "The 40% increase. That's city side, I can't touch it directly. But Meridian Group has a commercial corridor partnership grant that funds small business continuity in our development zones. Your cart qualifies. The grant would cover the fee increase for 3 years with an option to renew." Darnell put both hands flat on the table. He did not speak for a moment. "3 years," he said. "3 years," Calvin said. "And you're doing this because I gave you a coat." Calvin considered that. "I'm doing this because the corner you've worked for 11 years was about to be taken from you through a process that had my name on it, and you gave a cold stranger your coat without asking anything. I'd have fixed the map zone issue either way once I knew. The coat just made sure I looked." Darnell took a breath. He looked out at the window, at the city, at the slice of 5th and Meridian visible from the 14th floor. He thought about the legal pad in his shirt pocket. He thought about 2 a.m. and lying in the dark next to Renee and that thing that was close to a prayer. "I just need to be able to see it." "I'll need some time to review any paperwork," Darnell said. "Of course," Calvin said. "Take whatever time you need. There's no pressure." Darnell nodded. He picked up the folder and held it. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead." "The morning I gave you the coat, you were in a $2,000 suit without an overcoat in -4 degrees. How does that happen?" Calvin smiled. It was a small, real smile. "Breakfast meeting, nice warm room. I left my coat at the check and walked out without it. I do it at least 3 times a winter. You forgot your coat. Every time." Darnell looked at him and then he laughed, a short, genuine sound, and Calvin laughed too, and for a moment the 14th floor was just 2 men in a room finding the comedy in the thing that had brought them there. Darnell took the folder home. He and Renee sat at the kitchen table after Marcus was in bed, and he laid the documents out, every page, and told her all of it, starting from the cold morning and George's last cup of coffee, and the man in the expensive suit who was shivering at the cart, and the coat, and the card, and the phone call. He told her about the van outside on Calloway Street and why he had made Marcus's lunches those 3 mornings in a row without saying why. He told her about the legal pad in his shirt pocket. He pulled it out and unfolded it and set it on the table between them. Renee looked at the number he had circled at the bottom. She looked at the city documents. She looked at the grant letter with Meridian Group's letterhead on it. She said nothing for a while. Then she said, "You gave a stranger your father's coat." "He was cold," Darnell said. She looked at him. She had been looking at him for 14 years, and she had always known exactly what she was looking at. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. "Okay," she said. That was the whole of it. For her. Okay. He returned the signed paperwork to Calvain's office the following Monday. Sandra at the reception desk recognized him now and smiled. He went up to the 14th floor and left the envelope with Joelle, who had a warm practicality about her that he appreciated, and when he came back down, he stepped out onto 5th Street and walked south to his corner. He stood at 5th and Meridian for a few minutes, just standing there, not to do anything but to be there. The scaffold was still up on the east side, but the foot traffic was finding him again. He had noticed that. A natural drift back now that the construction noise had lessened. He counted 5 people who walked by and gave him a look that said they might stop on the way back. He thought about his father, who had worn the coat for 15 years and given it to Darnell when Darnell started the cart, and who had told him the only rule was to show up. Just show up, his father had said. The rest has a way of working itself out if you put in the showing up. His father had been right about most things. Darnell put his hands in the coat pockets and turned into the wind. There was a certain kind of cold that didn't bother you once you had been through worse cold. He was fine. He was going to be fine. He went to get his cart. The months that followed were not easy, not all of them. The scaffold came down in March and the foot traffic came back strong, and the permit renewed in April without the fee increase thanks to the Meridian Group grant. And those were good things. He hired a part-time helper named Jerome for the lunch rush, a kid from the neighborhood who was saving for community college, and he trained him the same way he did everything. Patiently and without shortcuts. Marcus had a clear spring, his best in 3 years. The medication was working and the weather was warming, and the boy ran in the school track meet in May and placed second in the 50-metre dash. And Darnell stood on the bleachers at the school and watched him cross the line and felt something in his chest that had no proper name but that he recognised as the thing he had been working toward all along. Not the permit, not the grant, this. His boy running, breathing clean, crossing a finish line in the May sun. Renee called his name from 2 bleacher rows down, and he looked at her, and she was taking a photograph, but also watching him. And she smiled the way she sometimes did. That meant she was keeping this moment, filing it somewhere she would not lose it. He smiled back. Calvin and Darnell did not become friends in any casual sense. They were not men who moved in the same world, and they were not going to pretend otherwise. But they had a respect for each other that was honest. The kind that comes from having seen what a person does when nobody is watching, and that was enough. Calvin stopped at the cart every couple of weeks when his morning took him that direction, and he always paid for his coffee, and he never accepted a discount. And they talked for a few minutes about whatever was in the air that day, nothing that cost either of them anything, just 2 men on a corner in a city taking a moment. One morning in late September, more than 8 months after the coat, Calvin came by the cart and ordered his usual, and while Darnell was pouring it, Calvin said, "My daughter Maya is doing a school project on small business owners in the city. Would you be willing to talk to her for half an hour sometime?" "How old is she?" Darnell said. 15, Calvin said. "Bring her by on a Saturday," Darnell said. "I'll show her how the cart works." Maya came on a Saturday in October. She was serious and precise, and she had her father's eyes and a notebook she kept making marks in, and she asked better questions than most adults Darnell had talked to in his life. She asked how he had started. She asked what he had done when it was hard. She asked whether he had ever wanted to quit, and he thought about it for a real moment before he answered. "I thought about it," he said. "One night in particular. There was a winter when things got tight and I couldn't see the way through. And I decided the next morning I was just going to show up and do the thing I knew how to do and trust that the path was there even when I couldn't see it." Maya wrote that down. "Did it work?" she asked. "You're standing here," Darnell said. She looked up from the notebook and she smiled, a real one, and she was her father's daughter in that moment too, in the way the smile took its time. Darnell made her a hot chocolate, which was not on the cart's regular menu, but which he kept supplies for because Marcus sometimes came with him on Saturdays. And Maya stood at the cart on that October morning with the notebook under one arm and the cup warming both hands, and she looked up and down 5th Street the way people look at something when they are really looking at it, not just passing through. "You like this corner?" she said. "I do," Darnell said. "How come?" He thought about it. "Because I know it," he said. "I know which way the wind comes in the winter and which side of the street gets the morning sun and which buildings send people out at which times and which regulars take their coffee before they're ready to talk and which ones want to talk right away. You spend 11 years somewhere and you learn it, and then it's yours." She wrote that down too. She published the project in November. Her teacher sent it to the school district's student journalism website, and a city paper that ran a weekly feature on neighbourhood businesses picked it up and ran a 2-paragraph summary. It was nothing grand. It was a school project and a neighbourhood page. But Renee found it online and printed it out and taped it to the refrigerator, and Marcus read it and asked Darnell which one was him. And Darnell pointed to the line that said, "The vendor had a son who ran track," and Marcus said, "That's me," with the satisfaction of a 9-year-old who has just confirmed that the world is paying attention in the right direction. "That's you," Darnell said. The coat hung on the hook by the apartment door all through that fall and winter. Darnell wore it every morning to the cart. The lining was still frayed at the left elbow, the button still held by the knotted thread, and he had no plan to repair either because some things work exactly as they are. His father had always said that too. Leave what's working alone. There are corners in every city where someone has shown up every morning for years, doing the same work with the same care, invisible to the buildings around them, and the city does not know their name. Darnell had been one of those people. He had not done what he did for recognition. He had not given his coat because he expected anything in return. He had given it because a man was cold, and the coat was there, and that was the whole calculation. He couldn't know that January morning that the stranger shivering at his cart was the man whose firm's name sat on the document that was going to erase him. He could not know that one impulsive act of plain generosity was going to redirect the attention of someone who had the power to correct a wrong Darnell hadn't even fully understood yet. He could not know any of that. He just knew a man was cold. And that has always been enough of a reason. The following January, 1 year to the month after the morning it had all begun, Darnell arrived at 5th and Meridian at 5:45 in the dark and set up the cart. He lit the urns and arranged the trays and checked the supplies. The temperature was 14 degrees and the sky was that deep, dark blue that comes just before the city starts to lighten, and he could see his breath in the air. Jerome showed up at 6, on time, because Jerome was always on time now, because Darnell had taught him that showing up was the foundation and everything else was built on it. Cold, Jerome said. Same as last year, Darnell said. You good? I'm good. The first customer of the morning came at 6:12, a woman who worked in the office building on the south corner and had been buying her coffee from Darnell for 7 months. She took a medium with cream and 2 sugars and she said, "Have a good morning," and Darnell said the same, and she walked away into the blue dark morning. The day began. Darnell put his hands in the coat pockets and stood at his corner and watched 5th Street come to life the way it did every morning. The lights going on in the upper floors, the first delivery trucks, the early walkers with their heads down against the cold, the city unfolding itself one block at a time into another ordinary day. He was still here. His corner was still here. He was going to be fine. Have you ever seen someone do a small, quiet thing for a stranger and wondered whether it mattered? Drop a comment and tell me. And if this story stayed with you, there is another one waiting when you are ready. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment. All characters and events are entirely imagined.